So I want to talk about different styles of writing. I talked about the inverted pyramid a couple of videos before this. I want to talk about what's called something in the book they call it the hourglass format. In other things they call it like the martini glass. I actually like the martini glass as a concept, what it's called. Trying to think if I have this one book here. The martini glass is one of the forms that sometimes it gets called. And the martini glass, I mean, if you think about what a martini glass looks like, a martini glass is has like this kind of triangular inverted pyramid top, and then there's usually like a long stem, and there's like a circular base that it sits upon, kind of like a wine glass, except the top is actually a triangle. And an hourglass, you have kind of a triangle here, and then there's a little tube in between them. All of you can kind of picture those things. Well, the idea of those, the martini glass, hourglass, wine glass, whatever kind of concept you want to call it, the basic idea is that it's basically an inverted pyramid at the top. You start off with the most important facts, you kind of work your way down. But in this format, it's different because in this case, you're going to extend it, and you kind of get to a point where you go, okay, I'm going to give you all the important facts up front. I'm going to put the first, third of the story, quarter of the story on that kind of inverted pyramid. Here are the key thoughts, here are the key facts, here's the key things. And then I am going to give you that stem or that transitional area between the two parts of the hourglass. And that's usually, a lot of times that's like a chronological, that's more of a narrative form, that's where you kind of tell things as they happen and so on. And then you have the base or the bottom, that bottom part, the hourglass, that bottom triangle, or the base of a wine glass. And the basic idea there is when you get to that part of the story, that's kind of where you come back to kind of giving out, kind of flaring out important facts, important information. I talked to you a little bit about the idea of kind of leave them wanting more. That's kind of that area where you kind of go back to, okay, we did a chronology, we kind of went through the facts, we kind of wrote in a narrative format, and now we're going to kind of throw out some important facts and some important information. And it's also something called the kicker. And so it's kind of that thing that kind of holds it all together, where you give a lot of, like, some kind of important, interesting things right there at the end to kind of pull it back together. Now, what happens is these formats, usually there's kind of two places I would say you might see this. You might see it in a crime story. You might also see it, and most commonly I say, in an obituary. An obituary, what happens is usually you start off with something like, some famous actor died today. A three-time Oscar-winning actor, so-and-so, died today in his home at the age of 77 from heart failures. Whatever it be, right? Usually you want to tell what they died of, that they died, why they were significant. And then you might start in with, this actor was known for his debut role and was most well known for this role. He also is known for this, or she was known, and it's kind of just, you're giving kind of the most important facts. Who are they? Maybe the facts about why they, what happened, why they died, whatever it be. But you're kind of giving that kind of traditional thing. But then when you're telling the story of a person's life, the problem is you're not going to sit there and reorder everything. Like, okay, this is more important than this, or this movie was more important than this, or this marriage was more important than that marriage, or whatever you want to do, right? And so what happens is you're going to start off with that kind of inverted pyramid, but then maybe you go into like a chronology. And the chronology is basically just, you start off and you say, they were born to so-and-so, and you kind of give the whole history of their lives. And then at the end, maybe you give kicker, which is, some of the people they worked with, some of the people they acted with, and you kind of go back and you kick out with some of that important stuff. And so that's kind of the idea. You start off with an inverted pyramid, you give a chronology, and then you kind of hit out some important things at the end. Crime stories can also go in this format where, you go, three people were shot during a fight over blankety blank, blah, 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 you kind of go with that. And then maybe you switch into a narrative format where you give a history of what happened, you kind of detail out what happened, and then you kick back out with maybe, where the investigation's going, what the next move is, maybe some quotes from the mayor and other concerned citizens, things like that. And so you're not going through a pure inverted pyramid. You're not necessarily spending the entire time. The inverted pyramid is great for, kind of news stories, but yeah, it kind of is lacking when you get into a more in-depth story. When you get into kind of later in the news cycle, it's, something that's maybe not just breaking news. The inverted pyramid is awesome for breaking news, but when you're beginning to actually explore and you're kind of telling the story in its full detail, oftentimes that format of trying to go from most important to least important begins to break down. And so that's where these things like the wine glass or the martini glass or the hourglass begin to make sense, where you kind of give the inverted pyramid, then you kind of just tell the story in a narrative form, and then you kind of kick out with some important information that you've held back at the end.